Welcome to the fourth video of this section on matter and change. In this video, we're going to continue our discussion about the classification of matter. And if you remember, in the last video, we divided matter into two types, pure substances and impure substances. We then said that impure substances were frequently known as mixtures. And we spent the remainder of that talk on the classification of mixtures. This video is going to concentrate on pure substances, and so the first thing we need to do is define what a pure substance is. And a pure substance has an unvarying composition. You will have 100% of the substance. So you can have pure gold. You can have pure sugar. You cannot have pure salt water. Why? Because you can have salt water that is more salty or less salty. The amount of sodium chloride to the water ratio can vary. If all I have in front of me are gold atoms, then it's always 100%. If I add anything else, I no longer have a pure substance, I have a mixture. In other words, I can't have two piles of gold in front of me and have one pile of gold be golder than the other. It can weigh more, it can have more gold atoms, but it can't be purer than the other pile of gold. We break pure substances down into two categories, elements and compounds. And before we get into that, we need to bring up a new definition. And this definition will be for chemical change. I hope you recall that a physical change occurs, and when that happens, several physical properties of a substance will change, but the composition of the compound doesn't change. The chemical you start with is the chemical you finish with. In a chemical change, you produce matter that has a different composition than the original matter, and there is no change in the type or the amount of atoms. Or put another way, what you start with chemically is not what you finish with. So an element is the simplest form of matter that has a unique set of properties and cannot be broken down or altered by a chemical change. Now we all know that elements are made of atoms, and atoms can be broken down into protons, neutrons, and electrons, but that change is not a chemical change. This was the problem the alchemist had in trying to change lesser metals into gold, is they were trying to change an element chemically. That cannot be done. Examples of elements, well, actually look at the periodic table and you'll have a list of all the known elements. A compound is a substance that contains two or more elements that are chemically combined in a fixed proportion and can be broken down by chemical change into elements. Examples of compounds: water, is H2O. It always has two hydrogens and one oxygen. Table salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. It always has a ratio of 1 sodium to 1 chloride. That's the fixed composition. Caffeine has this formula, which means that every molecule of caffeine has 8 carbons, 10 hydrogens, 4 nitrogens, and 2 oxygens. That ratio is constant. Compounds have a defined ratio of each element to each other. So we can now look at the classification of matter in a flow diagram, and I will apologize ahead that writing is a little small, but that was so I could get it all in. We start with stuff, and then you ask the simple question: can the stuff be separated by physical means? If the answer is yes, you have an impure substance or a mixture. Now, for the mixture, you say, is every sample of the mixture identical? If the answer to that question is yes, then you have a homogeneous mixture. Salt water, air, coffee, all of those are homogeneous mixtures. However, if your answer to the question, is every sample of the mixture identical, is no, now you're dealing with a heterogeneous mixture. Chicken noodle soup, chocolate chip cookies, things like that. Let's go back to the first question. Can the stuff be separated by physical means? If the answer is no, you now have a pure substance. So now you ask the next question. Can the substance be further broken down using chemical means? Can you chemically break down the substance. If the answer is no, you're dealing with an element. If the answer is yes, you're dealing with a compound. And remember, chemically, a compound can be broken down into its constituent elements. So you now have the ability to determine whether a sample that is given to you is a pure substance, an impure substance. If it's a pure substance, whether it's a compound or an element. If it's a mixture, whether it's homogeneous or heterogeneous. So in the next lecture, we're going to begin to discuss symbols for the elements and more about chemical formula. This is more basic chemistry. Then we'll end up with chemical properties and chemical change, and then we'll be able to move on to the next section.